So in our effort at ProBoomer to bring more awareness to not only how people, everyone, quite frankly, but especially those over 50 can cope with the pandemic, but also how this might be changing our world in all respects, economy, business, and jobs and such. Today, we've got an exceptional guest to bring exceptional awareness to this, Chris Farrell, who is a senior economics contributor on Marketplace on NPR, also an economics commentator for Michigan Public Radio, the host of conversations on the creative economy. He writes for PBS's Next Avenue and the Star Tribune in the Twin Cities area, and he's a graduate of the London School of Economics. And so, Chris, you are keeping your finger on the pulse of everything that's going on. And we have to say, who knows what's going to happen with this, with both the pandemic and what our world is going to be like, but you have to figure and at least be concerned that it's going to be significantly different. So here on March 23rd, what's your broad high altitude take of what's going on and maybe what we need to be thinking about?
Okay, so before I get to that, you're fine and your family is fine?
Yes, it is. And how is yours?
Absolutely, they're very good. So
thank you for asking.
I'll have to kind of remember to.
Yeah. So far, so good.
So far, so good. Exactly. So when you're taking the high altitude, the economy, whether it's in a recession or worse, the economic activity is plummeting. And we see that, we know that. The unemployment rate is likely to double. You had the head of the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis said we could see an unemployment rate of 30%. You have mainstream economists. Now, whenever the economy weakens, there's always a group of economists who say this is going to be a Great Depression, right? And so far, they've been wrong. But there are a number of economists now, very sober, who are saying, look, this is going to be potentially like a depression because of the unemployment rate, because so many people being thrown out of work. And, we could have a conversation about, okay, is this economy going to fall at a 4% average annual rate? Is it going to be an 8% annual rate? Is it going to be a 10% rate that this economy is going to fall? And that's sort of like an abstract number. What's 4? What's 8? What's 10%? But when you start talking about going from an unemployment rate of 3.5% and doubling that quickly, that's what we're living through right now. And then depending on this huge uncertainty, this conversation we're having all depends on the virus, the extent of the virus. Does the virus come back? Is the virus suppressed? All kinds of issues, but you're going to see a high unemployment rate, and that is what is key right now.
Because the ramifications, well, first of all, I think of what Ronald Reagan said, that some people call it a recession, but if it affects you, it's a depression.
That's right. Yeah. And the economy is employment to most people. I mean, that's what the economy means, right? Do I have a job or do I not have a job? Do I have a good job? Do I have a bad job? But the economy is not an abstraction when it comes to your job.
Because at the end of the day, not only do we need it to survive, but we need people out there spending money in order to make the economy thrive. And there's been talk about, well, there'll be a lot of pent-up demand, which there very well could be, but also if you don't have any money, you can't take advantage of that.
Exactly. So this is why, so you have the Federal Reserve has taken a number of dramatic steps, and they've been increasing how dramatic they're being to try and support the credit system, the U.S. Treasury market, the mortgage market. Now they're going to be helping out in the corporate bond market and also in the potentially the municipal bond market. So, but they're making some very strong moves. As we're talking right now, Congress is debating a $1.6 trillion to $2 trillion funding into the system. Here's the key. The number is big. It's going to remain that big. They're going to negotiate a deal. And so the details really do matter. But again, Congress is going to put a lot of money into the system, put a lot of money into work. The key, I think, for personally is small business and people who are vulnerable to losing their jobs or have already lost their jobs. That's really the key in this economy. You know, there's this thing that's been out there. Lots of people talk about it, how little money people have to deal with a financial emergency. And you've seen that number, $400. You know, half of people, households don't have $400 to deal with in an emergency. It's no different with small business. Every small business is about 3 weeks from failing. So, and this is not because they're irresponsible. This is not because you know they didn't save. It's because it's a business where the income coming in and your expenses, you know, it's a very thin wedge right there. I mean, a lot of small businesses, when you have a blizzard and they're shut down for a week, you know, they really struggle. Now think about what we're going through right now. So this is really the key. People who are losing their jobs in small business, and that's the focus that I would like to see.
So, yes, I know a lot of people are talking about, okay, first of all, let's go on the jobs thing, but also that's related to a lot of people over 50 when they start looking at, you know, my 401k or the money that I have put aside, and least of all the fact that you see a lot of numbers. The one I usually go by is 55% of baby boomers have no retirement savings. And, you know, for many people, Social Security will not match their current lifestyle even close. So first of all, let's talk about jobs and the fact that, especially people over 50, but everyone, it's like, okay, if you have a job, will I be able to keep it? Even if I'm working from home, or certainly if I'm furloughed and my business that I work for is going out of business, or people who are already looking for a job, or people who are saying, oh my gosh, you know, if this thing gets much worse than it might, I have to go back to work. Sorry, I just had 50 questions pop into my mind about how to deal with this. But I mean, this could be a critical time to, for instance, really begin preparing yourself for finding another job or getting back in the job market.
Well, I think that's really important. Now, you know, people's circumstances differ, and depending on what you do and what part of the country you have and what resources you have. But it's not that I wouldn't pay attention to the stock market, but I'd pay attention to two things: your debt and your job. And those are just, I mean, think about if you have some credit card debt and it's at, let's say you have a good credit card, so it's at 8%, maybe it's at 11%. You know, every time you pay down that credit card debt, that's 11% return on your money, or an 8% return on your money. And you're reducing risk in your household. So the way that I like to think about this is, as we're entering this emergency, think about where is the real vulnerability in my household. And for a lot of people, it's debt. For many of us, particularly if you're in your 50s, early 60s, it's your job, because we know if you lose your job and you're in your 50s or 60s, it's very hard to get reemployed even once this economy starts growing again. So I would focus on risk in what you can control. There's so many things you can't control right now. So focus on what you can control.
You called that in an article, which if you go to Chris Farrell on LinkedIn, you'll find the link for it. Household risk management. So again, that's looking at where's your debt and anything else. I mean, so that's credit cards, student loans.
Right? And you can go down the list, and you know, you really want to get rid of it. You know, work your way at credit cards first, auto loan next. If you have a home equity loan, you know, let's reduce that. In other words, make yourself that you can live with less cash flow coming in because you reduce these debt obligations. Think about your job. And the other thing I'd really like to emphasize is to, you know, when we've talked, we talk about the importance of your network, right? We talk about how are you going to get a job when you're 64 years old. The way you're going to get a job, 64-year-old, is through your network. And it's usually some third, fifth degree of separation where someone will say, hey, you know, you should talk to this person because I know this company or this organization is looking for somebody, right? Well, now, but also think about your network as part of your household safety net. And reach out to your network and are you okay? just as we started out our conversation. Are you okay? Can I help you out? Is there anything I can do for you? If someone does lose their job, maybe there's a project that you can work with them on, get them a little bit of money. Maybe there's some things you can help them out with. So think about family and friends and your close relatives and your close friends and the people you know over the years, and reach out to them just as you reach out to those people. And that's your main advice. When you're looking for a job, reach out to them at a time like this. And you may be able to help them out. They may be able to help you out. That network is part of your safety net. And it's also a time when we're going to learn or relearn, and we're going to have to learn again. But if you're giving, it's good for you and it's good for the other people. And then there'll come a time when, now just putting on a real practical hat, where things are getting better, and what you were just talking about, thinking about a job, that your network is going to be there for you at that time, but you want to be there for your network now when they need you and you need them.
You raise a very good point, and sometimes it's undervalued. It may still be, but the connectedness, on the one hand, from a mental health, emotional standpoint, right. I posted an interview last night like this with Dr. Sara Geber about being connected, and especially with solo agers and such, but just everyone. I've already started doing it through Zoom or Messenger, right, or FaceTime or WhatsApp or WeChat, and reconnecting with people I haven't spoken with in 20 years. And one person who I was talking to over the weekend is going to now probably help me with ProBoomer. So it's amazing what you get. Whatever you put out, you get more back. And but with the job thing, networking, you don't want to be counting on a HR sweatshop, so to speak, going through 500 resumes a day or things of that sort. Networking is still number one. And doing it the conventional way is number 33. There's just a big gap there. You raise a very good point.
And the other thing is, all right, so, I'm one of the lucky people, you're one of the lucky people, we can work out of the home. And, we can do our job. There are many people, a waiter, they can't do their job out of the home, and they're losing their jobs. So we're among the lucky that can work out of home. If you are working out of home, it can be a little bit of frustrating. A lot of places are, stay in place, stay in home, lots of encouragement, just go outside for a walk, but, limit your connectedness to other people except for online. Well, use this time to think about what it is you want to do next. Because one of the things is we're all so busy, right? And you and I are dealing with a world where people are starting to think about, well, what do I want to do next? I don't want to retire in the traditional sense of the word. I want to stay engaged in the workforce, but what is it I want to do next? And one of the things that's really hard is it's just hard to find the time to do it. Introspection is a luxury. Well,
it's low on the priority list when you've got 500 tasks and you can do 23 of them. Yeah,
exactly. Well, now you have some time. And you can do some introspection, just, a couple of minutes every day. One of the things I like advising people to do is write down some thought about what it is you want to do every day. This is not literature. It's never going to be published. So it doesn't matter if they're coherent sentences, but you just sort of spend 5 minutes, half an hour a day, just thinking about, well, what do I want to do next? Who would I want to talk to? Who's doing something that I actually admire doing, and how did they get to do that? And maybe I'll reach out to them during this time and just have a Zoom conversation like we're having. So I think a lot of this is, all of us have projects on the shelf that we've not done, and we keep thinking, I'm going to get to that eventually. Sometimes we say, I'll get to that when I retire, right? So now you have this chance, pull that project off the shelf and have a sense of accomplishment. But I think one of the projects many people should pull off the shelf is take this time for introspection and think about transition, think about what it is I want to do next. And on the other hand, this is a real world experiment. What does this mean for my finances?
Good point.
Right? So, we're all giving the standard advice. And by the way, sometimes standard advice is really good. It may be standard and it may be simple and it may be but it's actually really good advice. looking at where you're spending your money, looking at where your money is going, where can you cut back? And a lot of people, unfortunately, are having to cut back very severely right now. But hopefully they get unemployment insurance in there to offset it. Hopefully we get some fiscal stimulus in there to offset some of it. But it's sort of like, this is a time to kind of figure out a lot of stuff. And if you, let's say you do have a goal and you want to be working in some sort of nonprofit down the road, and you kind of can figure out what salary you're going to make or what hourly wage you're going to make doing that, well, can you live on that? How does that fit into your budget? You're getting a real world experience about what matters to you and where you spend your money and where your income comes from. So again, I don't want to be saying, oh, this is a great thing, and let's turn this into something that is wonderful. That's not what I'm saying at all. This is a horrible thing. Unemployment is a terrible thing. The virus is a terrible thing. People are dying. But this also does offer an opportunity to kind of think through some of these things that we all know we should be thinking through. But boy, it's just hard to find the time.
Yeah, a couple of really strong points there. I wholeheartedly agree that given the fact that inevitably we have more time on our hands. I did a blog on this last week, saying, okay, a lot of people approach me saying, yeah, you're right, Paul, I should start thinking differently about what I'm going to do with the second half of my life. I don't have time. Well, now you do, because even if you're working from home, you're not going out to restaurants and friends and things of that sort. To your point, I think there's also an acute need, though, for people who are like, uh-oh, I've lost my job, or I'm concerned about my savings, or I'm concerned about losing your job. You've got the time now, unfortunately, to reevaluate, how well am I set up for a job? How up to speed am I? How up to date am I on what it takes to get a job and things of that sort, or whatever. And by the way, to your point, this sounds like sound advice. Well, you often hear people say, oh, well, that's absolutely right. And then they never do anything with it. A cliche is a cliche for a reason, because it's true. So right. Now is the time, and ergo this interview, to really be thinking, okay, plan for the worst and hope for the best, but be prepared. Use this time rather than finding yourself however long until this thing settles down going, uh-oh, I should have used this time to be ready.
That's right. And the other thing to think about is, we all talk about skill, knowledge, experience. So think about your skill, knowledge, and experience. And part of it is we're just talking about, what might that mean for your job in the future, what you want to do as a job in the future, but it's also what can you do now in your community? Your community needs you. And if you have skill, knowledge, and experience, and you have something to offer, and it may be online because we're not gathering the way we were before, but reaching out to various organizations in your neighborhood, in your community, in your city, in your town, whatever it is, but start thinking about, okay, so what can I do? I was really struck by how retired nurses and retired physicians are being called back to work, essentially, to help relieve some of the stress in our hospitals and our healthcare system. And that's wonderful. It's great because there's less training going on. They know what they're doing, and so they're relieving that stress. Well, okay, what is it that you can do? Now, maybe it's not getting out of your house because we're trying to stay shelter in place. But again, skill, knowledge, experience, what can you use to help out your community? Because the people listening to us having this conversation, they have a lot to offer. They really do.
Yes, absolutely.
Oh, it's like, okay, what do you have to offer? What can you do?
And sometimes it can be the most menial tasks that you even don't need much training for. But when I think about healthcare and everything, think of all the things nurses and doctors have to do that are very secondary but necessary to giving care, and taking even triage or paperwork or things of that sort. And not a great example, but you're right. There are so many things. And I would also go back to the connecting thing, thinking right. of people who are isolated for whatever reason, of whatever age or situation, and being in touch with them, teaching them how to use Zoom or thing that's it. There's so much that we can do. Let's truly hope, and I do expect that the situation will bring out the best of us.
Yeah, certainly hope that.
So let's go back to talking about jobs and finances a little bit. First of all, going with jobs, the nature of work is radically changing.
Yeah,
and changing at high velocity. even before this. I have to prepare for the fact that as this ebbs away, and especially the longer it lasts, which is the other responsibility for us, flatten the curve by staying healthy and following the needs, that the nature of work in so many respects is going to be different. And we have to prepare for that. So for instance, I wonder, the gig economy, people who are contractor, do contract work, freelance, gig workers, crowd workers, if that, for instance, which is already blossoming, is going to go further, but how we should be preparing for a change in the nature of things.
So some of this really comes down to how does it affect our public policy? Because for example, we've had this long debate about paid sick leaves. It's been going on for years and years and years. And I was reading, the beginning of Bismarck with his social insurance system back in the 1880s.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Basically, the forerunner of Social Security.
Social Security. The core was paid sick leave. That was actually the core of his program at the beginning. So I think this has really exposed the need for paid sick leave. And it's also exposed, at least to my mind, so we'll just say an Uber driver or a Lyft driver, and you are a waiter, and you are someone who works cleaning the hotels at Marriott, and you lose your job. It's somewhat arbitrary who gets to file for unemployment insurance and who doesn't get to file for unemployment insurance. And so I think we really need to be thinking about that unemployment insurance system that we have that excludes large categories. You're mentioning the rise of the gig worker, but the gig worker can't file for unemployment insurance.
I'm self-employed.
Exactly. And we applaud self-employment and we applaud what's going on. So, but they're excluded from a large part of the safety net. And then we also have a very interesting stark contrast between what's happening in parts of Europe and what's happening here, which is in Europe, the system is set up for the government to pay employers not to lay off their workers. So the government meets part of their salary, basically, if you're just boiling it down. And, if you think about most organizations, there's always stuff for people to be doing. I mean, just as in our own lives, there's many things that we have on the shelf. Many organizations, many companies have things that are on the shelf. So, but it keeps people employed. Because here's my real fear. Particularly for the older worker, the experienced worker, is long-term unemployment. And when you look at the last recession, and this is going to be bad like the last recession, the 55 plus worker was less likely to lose their job than their younger peer. But when they lost their job, they were much more likely to join the ranks of the long-term unemployed. And the government defines long-term unemployed as you're unemployed for 6 months or more. And the problem with long-term unemployment is that all of a sudden you get this stigma. And I've never understood this stigma, but there is this assumption that you have gone brain dead in 6 months, that you knew how to use a computer 6 months ago, but now you no longer know how to use a computer. You were able to deal with customers 6 months ago, but all of a sudden you no longer know how to talk. I mean, it's a totally bizarre prejudice.
Well, the same thing goes with age, that somehow because you're 60 years old, you're not as creative as you were. Whereas for most of us, it's like, no, I'm even more creative and better at what I, am good at doing.
And we're also just seeing with the schools and the schools being, the students being from home, and you're seeing the real inequality in internet connections and how that can have a real impact in this sort of internet age that we live in. And we're doing Zoom and we don't even think about it. We're just doing Zoom. This is a great thing to be doing. So many people are doing it. And yet there are segments of our society that are excluded from that system. So I think a big part of this is going to be on the public policy level. So, but I think in terms of individuals, it just reinforces this thought. This isn't the only pandemic. It may just be that this is built into the system of globalization. And we're still going to have air travel. We're still going to have cargo ships. We're still going to have supply chains, maybe not as big as they are right now or as extended as they are, but you're still going to have supply chains. So just as the first 15 years of the internet, we all applauded what was going on. And then there were these people over here worrying about, you know, privacy and cybersecurity and what this meant for information. And now we're all realizing if you want the internet, you're also going to get concerns about privacy. You're going to get concerns about fake news. I mean, these things are built into the system. You can't have one without the other. Pandemics is built into globalization. And therefore, how does that affect our social safety net and the way that we deal with it? But for individuals, particularly those who are 55 plus, I think you're absolutely right. It does mean thinking a lot more about working remotely, thinking a lot more about gig economy work, sharing economy work, and being prepared for that kind of work.
Last night, 60 Minutes did an interview with Neil Kashkari, who is the Federal Reserve, head of the Federal Reserve Bank in Minneapolis. But he was the Assistant Treasury Secretary in 2008 and was in charge of TARP, which was the Trouble Assistance Relief Program. And he said a couple of very interesting things. And he was very good about saying the truth. We have no idea how bad this is going to be, how long it's going to go, what the outcomes are going to be. But he did look back. And the first lesson that he said is that we were very careful to not overreact back in 2008. He said we should have overreacted. Yeah. We realized after the fact that overreaction would have been better because we were way too slow. So fortunately, it seems that we're seeing that in the government now, that they're taking they took that lesson. He said that obviously how long this lasts until we can get up to running speed again is obviously going to determine how bad that it would be. Because the longer that it lasts, the more jobs that are going to be lost, and some may be lost forever. But that it took, to your point about long-term unemployment, 6 months, that if it actually took 10 years to recover the job market from where it was in 2008. So this is a long-haul situation with long-term consequences, but even with consequences, where they say where there's a problem, there's an opportunity.
Yeah, and I think then the other thing that he said is that the Neil Kashkari was the mistake that they made is they didn't target enough at households. And they were so worried about, is this a deserving household or is this an undeserving household? And we don't want to give money to a homeowner that's underwater that is an undeserving homeowner because they borrowed too much and they should have known better or whatever. You can spin out that story. And it was a big mistake. And I think one of the things, this is why, I'm in the camp that says, look, put the money toward, get it to small business. If small business is willing to, keep a worker on their payroll, it's not a loan, it's a grant. The same thing, getting the money into households, but it's about keeping people employed. And I think there's a lot of lessons that we can take for this. For example, earned income tax credit. You can't be over 65, I believe, and qualify for the earned income tax credit. Well, why is that? By the way, there are more and more people 65 and older who are working. Let's get rid of that kind of barrier. I think it is a chance to think about what are these barriers to employment that we've set up. Some of it has to do with age discrimination. Some of it has to do with worrying about this division between the deserved and the undeserved. A lot of this stuff needs to rethink. But I think for individuals right now who are living through this, you really are going back to the basics, the fundamentals. And as Warren Buffett has always said, they may be simple, but that doesn't mean they're easy to do. And so, right?
Yeah. Yeah, right. And I think we've got to realize that. I mean, it's just like sometimes it's painful to do that. To go back to what we were talking about earlier, to do that self-assessment of yourself professionally, income-wise, and whatever your situation is. To do the household risk management. To if you're looking for a job, realize my LinkedIn doesn't. I don't have a clue. I need to do something. Whatever the case may be, you got the time now, and you bet. And to me, it would be. I'll go out on a limb and say foolhardy to not do otherwise. If you don't need it, wonderful. But if you do need it, you got it.
That's right.
Hey, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
And just as you said, talk to your network. I mean, I know it's a modern business term, and we use it, but your network. But it's also kind of a good way of thinking about it. Your network. Reach out, talk to them, find out what they're doing. If somebody needs help, what can you do? And if you need help, what can they do? And here's the thing. People like giving. People like helping. At a time like this, if someone can help somebody else out, that's a good thing. It's good for everybody, but it's also good for the soul.
Absolutely. And before we wrap up, I want to go back to one detailed question, going back to the household risk management, when you were talking about, where is your debt? Where are you at risk and paying that off? Two things. One, how does a mortgage play in on that? And number two, I'm sure a lot of people are thinking, okay, I can pay that down, but I'm concerned about cash flow or cash
Right.
resources. So mortgage, and then also how do you make that judgment call on getting rid of cash that you have?
Okay, so on the, in terms of you're looking at the hierarchy of debt, and there's actually research where certain kinds of debt are associated with more stress, where people are more worried about it. Credit card debt is always the top of that list when you think about stressful debt. The primary home mortgage is the least stressful debt. And, where people get in the trouble with their borrowing is rarely around the mortgage. It's usually the home equity loan, and the credit card debt. So that's why I just look at those as stressful debts, and that's what you can focus, because usually most people who have a mortgage, they didn't buy the home if they couldn't really meet that mortgage. And by the way, one of the things is, and I think this is a good thing, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, the two mortgage giants, you can't be evicted from your home, or your home can't be foreclosed for 60 days. More and more people are embracing that. I think that's an important thing. But also when you're thinking about the debt, again, this is where your household risk assessment comes in. If you're really at risk of losing your job, you're hoarding your cash. You're just hoarding it, and you're putting it aside. And then if you do lose your job, then you're making certain determinations of what's the best use for that cash. And usually what it's going to be is to pay for your utilities and to pay for your rent, pay for your mortgage, and everybody else is just going to have to wait. Right? So it kind of, again, this is why I say this risk assessment. So a classic, if you're at risk of losing your job, classic is you save as much as you can, and you're going to make priorities of who you're going to pay back. Eventually you'll pay back everybody, but you know what? You have to have electricity. Mm-hmm. You just do, right?
Food.
And you have to have food. Yeah. So you make those priorities. I mean, hopefully you're not in that situation, but if that is the situation that you're in, run those scenarios. And if that's where the risk is for your household, and you may already be there, by the way, for some of the people listening to this, then you have to make those priorities. And that's what households do and have done throughout our history in really tough times.
And I will say, having done that yesterday with Kim, I felt better because I was fully aware of what my situation was. So whether it was good or bad, or this was a challenge or this wasn't, it was good to just know and not be wondering. And of course, with knowledge, knowledge is power, so to speak.
Yes.
Chris, this has been fantastic. We will be continuing to talk, so stay tuned to ProBoomer, www.ProBoomer.com, and also ProBoomers with an S on Facebook, and Paul Long on LinkedIn. Follow Chris at chrisfarrell.net, and also on through Next Avenue and Marketplace on NPR, and also his LinkedIn. Your LinkedIn page are great. You post everything.
Yeah, I just post everything on there. That's right.
And that's Farrell. That's right. I got it on the screen there. And we will keep talking about this, but the bottom line is take advantage of this opportunity, because you will have extra time on your hands to do these self-assessments, to do your household risk assessment, to look at your situation and start planning for whatever eventual outcome that we have. And let us support each other. And by the way, the supporting each other and taking on the project of figuring out what we're going to do, or that DIY project you've been wanting to do, will help us from going stir crazy. Get outside and get fresh air and help each other.
Exactly. Yep. And go for some hikes.
Okay, Chris, thank you so much.
Thanks a lot. Real pleasure.